There are things we just don't talk about.
Very good morning to everybody on behalf of Solidarity Tel Aviv Human Rights Festival. It is a great honor and pleasure to host with us the directors of a wonderful film from Ireland that is The Eighth. And with us this morning, and two of the three co-directors, Lucy Kennedy, Maeve O'Boyle, and regrettably not with us is Aideen Kane. And I should also mention that Maeve is one of the co-editors. So with all these credits and all this wonderful presence of the two of you, thank you very much for being with us this morning. Thank you for sharing your wonderful and, if I may say, very important film. So let us jump right into the steaming water. And for me, it is especially steaming because in Israel, I think that in many paradoxical senses, we are similar to Ireland in the sense that Israel is also imbued with religious tradition and forms of thinking about traditional arrangements of society in which women's rights and abortion are part and parcel of what shapes our societal face. So I was empathizing in so many respects and dimensions with the struggle. But first, I would like to hear from you perhaps a little bit about the process of making that film, because it seemed that it has endured through a long period of time. What can you tell us about how you came about to do it?
Well, the three of us came together in 2016. Lucy and Aideen, well, we were all actually living in New York for a long period of time, but Irish women living in New York. Aideen and Lucy still in New York, and I'm back in Dublin. But we came together back in 2016 in New York and talked about the Eighth Amendment and the whole issue around reproductive rights in Ireland. It had been such a huge issue in Ireland from the early days, from growing up in Ireland. We all grew up under the shadow of the Eighth. Like, this was something that was, you know, very much part of our lives. We'd seen women in tragic circumstances traveling back and forth to the UK for abortions and so on, and also women dying in this country in tragic circumstances too. So it was something that was, you know, a story that our generation, we felt, should tell. So the three of us came together, all three of us from quite different kind of filmmaking skills, filmmaking backgrounds. I'm an editor, storyteller, long form, kind of independent doc kind of editor. Wanted to do some directing. Lucy, investigative journalist, and Aideen, a producer. And we felt kind of with the three skills combined, and with our kind of connection to Ireland and our understanding of the issue, that we would be able to bring this over the line. So that's kind of when we began. Obviously, we've been working on it since then. So since 2016, we took a year really to research it and kind of, you know, go to a lot of different kinds of meetings, meet all the activists involved, and really kind of drill into the issue. At that point, you know, back in 2012, by the way, Savita Halappanavar had died in Ireland, which was just this absolutely massive issue, and became kind of a catalyst for a lot of younger activists to really fight the fight. And so we didn't know if there was going to be a referendum when we came together in 2016, but we knew that there was something was going to happen, because there was such pressure to change the law and to change this issue. So that's kind of where we began. And so 1 year of kind of research, and then we met Alva and Andrea, and we felt that those guys would be great to carry the story over the line and be our protagonists, and began shooting in 2017, wrapping up in around 2019, and ultimately bringing it out in the world. We had a world premiere in Hot Docs in 2020. So that's a really quick kind of, trajectory of what happened.
Lucy, what was your take on it, and your specific role in that trio of directors and conductors? I always like to call the directors conductors.
That's an interesting word to use. I wonder, I know you're the one doing the interviewing, but I'm curious as to why you use that. Perhaps that's for a later point. But yeah. Actually, it was Aideen and Maeve had both been thinking of doing a film independently on this issue, and Aideen approached me, and it was when Aideen approached me, I was all in. And then the three of us, we really worked very, very collaboratively together. So it's even though we came with a different skill set, it's even hard to identify where one person starts and the other person ends. Because, I was back and forth to Ireland. We each sort of took different elements where we directed parts of it, conducted interviews. Maeve was very much on the ground, sort of having to be super reactive to very fast moving things as they happened. And then, through it's been such a long process, it's hard to even sort of parse it out. But I mean, I think one of the reasons I responded to your question about filmmaking is I think that filmmaking is, and being a director is just in general such a collaborative experience. I'm really not a believer in this sort of auteur single director. There was a huge number of people involved. Like we have very wonderful DPs in Ireland who would like run and sometimes shoot when none of us were there. So there were just a vast number of people involved in the process.
What was your major dilemma in the course of making of the film?
I'll start first, Maeve, and then if you have any question or anything to add. I mean, I would say there was a number of dilemmas along the way. It's not like there's one single dilemma, and each part of the process, you're running into dilemmas every day. And firstly, you have to figure out how to tell the story and what characters to follow. So I think once we met Alva Smith, it was very clear that she was going to be our central protagonist, because her life sort of reflects almost, and activism reflects a change in Ireland. She's been an activist for 40 years or more. And then, I don't know, Maeve, do you want to talk about choosing Andrea?
Yes, I mean, I think just to follow on Lucy there in terms of choosing protagonists to follow, I mean, obviously that's always a huge issue in a film. And so, who do you go with? Who can carry the story? Who can bring in those layers that you need to tell? It's like painting a picture. It's like knowing this is going to cover this, but we also need to cover the grassroots and all that kind of stuff. And so Alva, of course, was absolutely integral to the whole thing. We knew she was the central protagonist, but we also wanted to capture the kind of grassroots movement and the younger generation. When we met Andrea, we just felt like she was absolutely perfect. The nail bar was kind of a little bit unorthodox. It was a little unusual. They were doing repeal nails. They were talking about repeal. It was a place to go, a safe space, if you like, in Dublin for people to go and get their nails done and talk about repeal. So it was just a different kind of story, but also because it was such a young movement, she felt perfect. And she was also interested in the murals and all kinds of artistic endeavors that went on that ran parallel. I will say, like anything, that was one problem. There were many other problems. For example, when we were raising funds in the early stages and the referendum was happening in 2 weeks, and we just ran out of money completely. Like we had no money. We had to get to the end line, which was in 2 weeks. You know what I mean? And you were kind of like, the camera guys had already been kind of doing us a lot of favors. And so, you know, we were incredibly indebted. So we were lucky in that Fork Films in New York came in and gave us some money to just right at that incredibly delicate line to get us over the line. And also Screen Ireland had also backed us. So we were just lucky. That was another huge issue. And I'll just add a third issue, I suppose, for us then in the post was in the edit, I suppose, was again, you know, the history of this issue is so profound and so central really to the whole thing. And how do you do it? Because in some ways it's not that it's more important, but you have a contemporary story and you have a historical story, and the contemporary story just doesn't have the context unless you do the historical. But how much historical do you do, and how do you make the historical interesting so people aren't bogged down in, you know, in heavy kind of didactic stuff? So basically we essentially obviously employed graphics and these graphic elements, which were absolutely integral to kind of quickly showing you a taste of what 1992 was like, for example. And it was interesting as well for us because we were gathering all this new stuff. Lucy did a lot of that, and it was kind of like, wow, so much happened in 1 year. So many things went wrong in 1 year for women, you know what I mean? And so if we did Savita Halappanavar, for example, was more like a medical, what went wrong medically at that time. And of course, we were able to gather many other medical issues, women who had cancer, who were, you know, under threat and so on, under the AIDS, so on and so forth. So it was one of those kind of like gathering processes that was also a really kind of challenging part of the edit and of the storytelling in general.
I'd like to make a comment. I hope it will lead to a question. I think it will, but starting with the comment, as an ethicist, a person, I mean, I devote most of my time now to looking into the problem of human ethics, the ethical condition of us humans living. And I tried as an ethicist to look at this battle of values. And I see two camps, and I want to put aside for a moment the issue, the problem of gender. And I see two clans of humans, each willing to kill or be killed for an idea. Now, I have my own opinion, and I should say it. I belong and I think like you. And I think that your fight is right and just and whatnot. But again, as an observer, and I want to share this kind of thinking with you, when I see these two camps willing to kill and be killed and bringing up the most lucid argumentations on both sides, I ask you as a fellow member to the human community, what can we and what ought we make out of this?
I think that's an extremely interesting question. And actually, I think that it is something that, you know, even when we started, it's a very interesting question because I do think it was central to our thinking early on. Even though, you know, we very much were always going to make a film with a point of view. But we did want to leave room open for that other perspective for a couple of reasons. One, you know, it's hard to understand the situation in Ireland without understanding that perspective. The other is that we all grew up in this society. You know, my values on this changed over the years. I mean, I grew up in a very, very Catholic household. There are people I love very dearly. And Maeve also has people in her life who have a very different perspective on this. I think that, sorry, bring me back to exactly the question you asked.
I'm standing at time breathless at the willingness of humans to fight over opposing ideas and the inability of one camp to convince through reason and even a sense of basic justice and what humanity or humans are. I mean, after all, this battle of ideas about what does it mean to, what is the value of human life? And I couldn't think of something which is more at the core of our foundation. And yet I look at the people of the church and they're, obviously I can think of it politically, but how is it that some kind of reason has not been able to really push us forward?
Well, I think so I think a couple of things. I think if you fundamentally believe, and your belief system is that it is at the point of conception, it is a full human life, and that effectively it is murder, then I can understand that argument, if that is your belief system. I think it's a really, and somebody like Alva would say, yes, she does think that life begins at conception, but takes into account all of these other factors. But I think being an ethicist is such a fascinating, there are no binary there are no answers to this, but I can just speak to how Elva and the team approached it in order to, you're never going to win over the hardliners. You're just not. So what they did was years of research, focus groups to see what would penetrate for people. So what they came up with was, we're going to soften our message a bit. This is not going to be, even though there were ardent activists who see this as a human right, everybody had to get on the same page and say, you know what, this is about a woman you love. This is helping a woman you love. So they honed their message. They kept everybody on message. And that's how they won over what they needed to win over to cross the line, which was the middle ground.
And I also would add, it's interesting because the marriage equality referendum, which happened a couple of years before the abortion referendum in Ireland, also put forth a message of love. And, so there was a kind of similarity in terms of approach, in terms of trying to really focus in on people's core, positive emotions, love, compassion, that kind of stuff. So it's just interesting. I'm not saying we certainly didn't solve it in the film, obviously, but we just tried to put forth the ways in which they approached it,
Neither has the referendum or its results solved the problem, but it certainly points at the fact that radical changes can be made in societies via slow and enduring processes of thought changing in the community. Yes. That is one point that cannot be taken from this historical fact.
Yes, that's true. But I do agree with Lucy, just on the issue itself. There is something, and it was something that I suppose we struggled with a little bit, even, in the making of it and in the edit too. It was kind of a lot of the the no side we're just saying this is murder, these kinds of espousing those kinds of beliefs. And it was we'd always wanted to get in the gray area. And it was hard because, as Lucy says, if you believe that this is a life from conception, there's not really that much to discuss in a way, because you know what I mean? But I think I think the compassion and the thing is a way to reach out and on some level and I don't know, cross that barrier to some degree.
What do you think the story with the church revealing all the bodies, the victims, the children, what do you think the role of this historical event played in the change of the approach of the public opinion, or even your opinion?
Well, I think there was a deep shame in Ireland around that issue. In fact, it had kind of, there was it had broken in kind of a smaller way before 2017, and then it kind of exploded in 2017. And even that was testament to the fact that people didn't want it. It was just one of these stories that was so deeply shameful in Ireland. And then, that's only one tiny story of many things that happened with mother and baby homes in this country. And even at the moment, there's a fight to, seal up some of the historical documents that are part of this issue. So there is this notion, and Lucy and I, and Adrian, in the edit, we had these 3 cards: silence, stigma, and shame, as our kind of guiding lights, to how we would, it's awfully often for me as an editor, a useful way to kind of just remember, that's what I'm trying to do. That's what I'm trying to do. Always reminding yourself that these are the core issues. But I think that June Mother and Baby Home speaks to all of those issues. And the society was so shamed, Irish society. It was a comeuppance. It was kind of like looking at yourself in the mirror and saying, Who do you want to be? Is this okay? You know, is this okay? Lucy, you might have something to say on that.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think, yeah, you said it.
What do you think is the next step in this long struggle of changing public opinion and understanding of how our society can think more progressively and not be clinging to these ideas and beliefs that are based on an era where less knowledge was available to humans on the question of meaning of life? How do you see the next step in your or our struggle now that this referendum has been approved?
I mean, honestly, I don't have an answer to that. You know, I feel like that what we learned from the film is that appealing to people at the place they're at is a very useful technique to win people over. And it sounds trite to say this, but you know, and I don't mean it to sound trite, but there's not another way I can articulate it, but like appealing to people's basic humanity as well, you know, this person that you know, this, like bringing it home for them. But in terms of the next step, Maeve, I don't know if you have anything to add to that. It's a very complicated question to answer, and I don't know.
I don't know either at all, but I do think that there was something very exciting and fundamentally kind of progressive about the activism that happened around this issue. And I suppose if we were to look back, we would understand that that is possible, and that shifted things in this country. And I have to say, it was predominantly women, and it was also predominantly women in their 20s and 30s who were doing it. Now, of course, these were women who were of childbearing age, so it mattered to them. But I just feel like that there is as Alva says in the film, there is this huge portion of people in this country who have said enough is enough. So I was never an activist myself, but documenting it made me realize the power of activism on that level. So I suppose I found that to be somewhat of a useful and some maybe an exciting, you know, prospect for the future of other issues.
I think actually, just to get back to, I think that, and you said this earlier as well, I think one of the things to take from the film is, you know, we can become so cynical, everybody can become so entrenched. And I think one of the thing that the film does do is show that even within an incredibly entrenched issue, there can be progress. It takes a long, long time. As Alva says at the end, you know, the revolution doesn't happen overnight. So that's something I learned through the making of the film. Yeah. Wow. You know, if you stick at it, you can affect change.
I think that is one of the greatest lessons of this film, that it gives hope to anyone who falls into cynicism, poor cynicism. Yeah, everything is, you know, all these conspiracy theories and there's no chance and no lag, blah, 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 blah. And I think this story and the way you told it and the very fact that you fought through it tells us that there is a sense in getting up in the morning and looking at your values and say, well, I'm willing to struggle for them. And it's important enough, and change can be made. And I think that the change that you've demonstrated is dramatically historical, in the sense that if when the 8th was first accommodated, it was 60-30, and then in some not too many years, historically speaking, the picture was reversed. I think that it's very fast, speaking in broad historical terms.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah. So this is a message of hope. How would you like to conclude with a message of hope to our audiences?
I just think that, yes, absolutely. Just keep on fighting the fight, because I think it's possible to find a middle ground and find some, you know, find a way forward. I think one has to be patient, but it will happen.
What is your next project, Maeve?
I'm currently working on a film about Joan Baez, the folk singer. Yeah. So I'm right in the middle of that at the moment. So it's exciting. Yeah.
Wonderful. We'll have to discuss that privately because I have a lot in my history with her. Beautiful. And Lucy, a word of hope from you. And again, what is your next project?
Well, I think I would concur with what Maeve said. And I suppose what I'd like to say is that thank you guys for having us. And just to say it's really bittersweet because we would love to be there and really would love to be there and hope to make it there another time. I'm currently working on a project where it seems like there's not that much hope at the moment, which is about the situation in Hong Kong and sort of the sort of encroachment on their semi-democratic state, and the activists that are being followed and what I'm working on, are really in their darkest hour at the moment.
Well, it's filmically speaking, it's a good starting point, and we hope you'll be able to tell us the story of triumph, like you did here. I would like to thank you, both of you, so much for sharing this conversation with me. I hope your wonderful film will arrive with great audience here in Israel and worldwide. And we look forward to having you physically on board with us next year or whenever you wish.
That would be great. Thank you for having us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right.
And thank you for your wonderful questions. This was definitely a Q&A like no other. So thank you.
Thank you for your wisdom and sharing it with us.
Okay,
right.
bye.
Bye-bye.